Hello, my friends, and welcome to another Penpot Hands-on session. We're live today, so if you have any questions throughout, you can just ask a question in the comments on your viewing platform of choice. So whether you're on YouTube or you're on LinkedIn or you're somewhere else mysterious, you can ask a question live, unless you're watching this back later, in which case you can still ask your questions in the comments. We'd still love to hear from you. Today, the topic is wireframing. So we're going to look at how you can do wireframing with Penpot. What is Penpot, you ask? Well, Penpot is a fabulous web-based open source design tool. And it's not just great for designers, it's great for developers too. The whole team will love it. And that is where wireframes come in. So I'm going to show you a little sketch. You just got a sneak peek at it earlier. And this is a sketch I did earlier today. So this is a wireframe. And this is all a wireframe really needs to be. It could just be a really basic sketch that you do in your sketchbook. It's called a wireframe because these lines are a bit like wires here. And it's an artifact, it's a document, it's a deliverable, but really the most important thing about a wireframe is that it's a communication tool. It's also a really great thinking tool as well. So a sketch that I might do like this is really a thinking tool for me. It's a way of wondering, oh, okay, what are the things that I want to have on a page, on a UI design? It's a way of thinking about what am I going to include? What do I need to not include? What might my rough layout be? But what about when I want to actually communicate this and share this with other people? My wireframes might start to look a little bit differently. So there's a few other things that you can do with wireframes. You could map out flows. This is an example of a homepage. You could do all the screens in your app. You could do chosen screens in your app. You could map out different behaviors and how things are supposed to work, how you flow through the user experience or the user flow of an app, different components and their states. That's quite useful to wireframe as well. And key interactions. So any kind of, if you have a menu, if you have an overlay, if you have a dialogue, they're important things to wireframe too. It's not just about how things look, it's about how things are supposed to behave. That might sound a bit familiar from our last prototyping session too. We can have all different kinds of wireframes. So you can have one like this that is like the most low fidelity. It's really basic hand-drawn sketch. You often also have things like annotations on a wireframe because even if it's communicating with your future self or communicating with someone that you're working with, it's useful to have little annotations. But you could also have a lo-fi wireframe that looks something like this. So this is a very similar design to the homepage I showed you before, but it's just that little bit more clean and detailed. And the benefit of creating a wireframe that's digital is that you can easily iterate on it. You don't have to start drawing something all over again. You can copy what you've got and work from that, or just continue working on that same document. And it's much easier to share because it's already in a format that you can share so easily with the rest of your team or collaborate with them live. You know, a tool like Penpot maybe. You can also go and you can take your sketch that you've already made. And what I've done here is I've just skewed it so that it is a bit straighter from my photo. And you can trace it. So this is one of the tricks that I do when sometimes I'm much quicker on paper and I just want to scribble something out. And then I'll bring it into an app like Penpot and I will trace it. And that way I can get all of the ideas and thoughts out on the page, but then I can make a version that is much easier to share with other people, much cleaner and easier for them to understand. No one has to read my handwriting, which is a real downside of a hand-drawn wireframe. And then we have much more high fidelity wireframes. So this, as you can tell from a very long, thin screen, is a mobile view. So this is that same homepage again, but we're focusing more on high fidelity details. So things like content. I think it's really useful if you are able to start with content, to start with the text that you're working from. We always get better design if we know what our user goals are and we know that the content that we're working with. And so I find that's a great place to start with more high fidelity wireframes. we can start adding in, oh, what's the button text going to be here? It doesn't necessarily have to be the final button text, but it could be an approximation of what you're going to end up with. But still, I have some very rough outlines, like this image is just really rough. I have some hierarchy starting to come in, so some of the text is bigger and bolder than other text. This isn't the final font. And so I've got buttons, I've got different primary and secondary buttons being shown. And then actually, if I go all the way to the bottom, one of the things that you can do in wireframes, if you're working with a design for an existing site, so this is a wireframe of the Penpot homepage, you can just grab sections of that site that already exist that you know you're going to reuse and pull those into your wireframe. Like, why not? So for example, if I go right to the bottom here, I'm like, well, it's the Penpot website. It's always going to have the same footer on every page. That's what we want to do. It's a consistent user experience. So I might wireframe the rest, but I don't need to spend loads of time recreating this footer every time when I could just do a screenshot. So it's much easier to do that way. One of the other things that I can show you as well, if I scroll all the way back to the top, is you can also use wireframes for adding things like overlays. So this is the mobile menu that will appear when you press this button on the Penpot homepage. And so you can use wireframes, more high fidelity ones, as a means of mocking these kinds of things up. One of the benefits of going really lo-fi, even this level of lo-fi, is no one is going to confuse your wireframe for the real thing. And it's an unfortunate truth that I have had clients that I've worked with in the past where I will bring them a wireframe like this and they think I've designed them a black and white website. Not ideal. And that is why one of the key elements of wireframing is the communication side of it. You're making it very clear to them, it's, look, I'm designing the idea of what we're going to have. We're focusing on the core things, the user goals, the behaviors, some key content, the key features. We're getting all these out and working out how we're going to lay them out. We are not going into polished details. We're not necessarily looking at typography, maybe a bit of hierarchy, but not looking at fonts. We're not looking at like really polished color details like that. They're all distractions. And sometimes it's so tempting to just jump into the really lovely polished UI design, but having a wireframe like this to start off with can really help you. So I think what I'm going to show you next is how you might want to start wireframing with Penpot. So I think we're going to do it using a library or a template. Libraries and templates, that's what we're going to go to next. Now, if you haven't found out already, Penpot has a fantastic libraries and templates collection. And these are a huge amount of free files that you can import and use in Penpot for yourself. Now, today what I'm going to use is this minimalist wireframing kit. You might not have seen it before. It's pretty new and I'm biased because I made it. So I built it just for this kind of purpose. So I've just downloaded that file. It's now on my computer. I'm going to go back to Penpot and I'm going to return to the dashboard. So this is Penpot's dashboard, and this is showing the projects that I'm working on my little demo team that I have here. And I'm going to use this little 3-dot options icon that is alongside my project and import that file I just downloaded. So importing the file. So that's just uploading and importing. Got quite a lot of components in there, so it might take a minute. There we go. My file has been imported. And this has imported the file to the same project. Now, you can see here there's a little icon. This actually says that this is a library as well. And I can go in, I can look at this file. And this, has a whole bunch of different components that I can use in wireframes. But the magic is not in this file. The magic is when I want to use that file. So if I'm going to jump back into the file I showed you before, this example file. Oh, and that reminds me, I will share the whole of this file later on. So if you join us on the Penpot community, and we'll make sure we share a link pretty soon after the live stream is over, I will share this file as is, even if it's a big mess, and you'll be able to see everything that I've done here today. So now that I've imported that template and it is a library that is sitting in my team, I can go to this Assets tab here, and I can go to Libraries. And if I look in my Shared Library section, it gives me the option to add this minimalist wireframing kit. So I'm going to add that. And so that is now a connected library that is connected to my file. Because it's connected to my file, it means I can access all of the components and the colors and the typographies from that kit inside of this file. So next we have to start thinking about what kind of wireframe we're going to create. But first up, I'll ask you, do you have any questions at this point? Anything, I mean, maybe I'll answer them in the future, in the next few minutes. But if not, if anyone has any questions, please show me. Michael asks, I'm very curious about the advantages and benefits of using Penpot compared to Figma. Well, for one, Penpot is open source, and so you can use it, and it is based on web standards, and it is free and open. And what that means is you can use it for free, you can self-host Penpot, and you can also be able to open the files in any other tool that supports web standards as well. So it uses technologies like SVG and HTML and CSS. Wireframes is not a great place to show you the code side of things right now, but I can tell you that Penpot exports to code really well, like actual good CSS. And the layouts is the other thing that I think for me is a feature that I love, and maybe we'll cover that again in a future session too. Are there any other questions right now? Okay, great. So let's move on to creating a board for a wireframe. So I've decided that I am going to make a mock-up of the Penpot sign-up page. So to do this, first of all, I want a board or a frame, you might also know it as, to create my design inside. So for this, I'll use the board tool, and I can just start drawing my board out any size that I want, a big web page. So I could do something like this. Now, of course, usually when you're creating a wireframe, you wouldn't be doing it from reference unless you're copying or ripping off someone else's design. No judgment. But I'm working from this design just so you can see how it works. When I've created a board, I can actually also choose from these different size presets, which is really useful because when you're wireframing, you do want to think about, what are you wireframing for? Are you designing something for the desktop, for a laptop? Are you trying to create something responsive? Do you want to make it a mobile design? And all of these size presets are really helpful in just having a default board size that you can use. So I'm going to go with a large mobile size, I reckon. Let's go iPhone. Pro Max. Yeah, oh, that looks actually really big compared to this. I'm going to make the image smaller so it's closer to the size. We can see them a bit easier side by side. Okay. And really that just gives you very useful dimensions to work with, because with wireframes, you can export them at any size you want. So that doesn't particularly matter. It's vector, so it's going to resize infinitely and scale really nicely. And of course, this is the size of the initial viewport of an iPhone, and you may well want to make it longer if you're working on a really big page that's going to have scrolling and things like that involved in. And I'm going to name this sign up. So that's just me naming the board there. Makes it much easier to see what I'm doing. Now, I also want to quickly show you something else you can do with clipping, because I think that's a really important thing if we're talking about boards. So going back to this lo-fi design, here you can see there's a couple of icons that are underneath the information for the board. And this one here is for clipping. And so I can decide whether the content on the board is clipped or not. So if I say it's not, if I say, I want to go to the bottom, and I'll say I'm going to clip the content. So when I resize this, you see the content disappears. It's being clipped. Whereas if I turned it off, when I resize it, the content is still there. So that's a useful feature to have when you're using boards as well. Going back to my little demo, let's look at how we can start using components for wireframes. That will be the next thing we go to. So now that we have imported the components from our shared library, our wireframing kit, into this file, from the assets folder, this is where we added and connected the library before. Now we have the components, colors, and typographies that are in my local library. So your local library is your file. And I have all of these components and colors and typographies from this minimalist wireframing kit. So what have I got here? Well, I've got avatars. I open these up. I've got badges. I've got a whole bunch of buttons as well. I've got things like dialogues, inputs, very important for if you're doing a form-based page design. I've got different elements for inputs as well, your radio buttons. I've got little toggles too. And notes as well. Earlier I mentioned having annotations is really useful, so there's a little component for that too. So using component library like this can make it really quick to build it up really quickly. Quick to build it up quickly. You know what I mean. So I'm going to start off with a logo. Important Penpot logo here, and that is an image. So we scroll to images. And I can just drag that onto my wireframe. I don't need the actual Penpot logo. This is just a wireframe after all. It's a pretty low fidelity one. And we are going to go very low fidelity, so I'm not going to worry about the actual text in this. I'm going to be thinking more about, okay, what are the features that we want inside here? We'll want a big heading. So that is text. Now you can just create text here. So you could just use the text tool and say, create an account. And in the typographies for this minimalist wireframing kit, I do actually have some preset text sizes. So I could just choose a title like that. What I could also do is go into this text components. And here I've created a whole bunch of just text-based components that are just easy to very quickly drag onto your design. You don't have to worry about what the content itself is. They're kind of a cross between like lorem ipsum, that nonsense Latin. I don't know if it's nonsense Latin. And so you can drag that in. So I'm going to have a line or so of text. So I'm going to drag this line of text in there. And it just shows there's going to be some text here. Usually I prefer not to work with lorem ipsum. I'd rather work with real text. But sometimes no one has worked with the content with you yet. You don't have that as an option. So this is useful instead. How about I want a button? So you don't necessarily have to go and browse through all of these components like this. That can be quite hard work. What you can do is just search the assets. So I can say, oh, I want a button. What are my options? I've got button text and I have buttons here. So I've got a sort of a primary and secondary style buttons. These are going to be buttons that have icons on them. So I'm going to just grab these options. Now, what if you want to edit the text in a button? You can do that. And you can do that by just going into the text and hitting enter to edit that text. And I can say Google. And that will update just this instance of the component. It won't override all instances of the component. So you don't have to worry about detaching this from the main component. And maybe I'm going to use the Command D shortcut to duplicate. And again, oh, these are a bit wide now, a bit narrower. These buttons are all using flex layout, which means they resize pretty nicely. They're not going to be evenly sized. I'm really going for a lo-fi wireframe, and that means I don't need to be worrying about distances and alignments. It's really tempting to just align everything really nicely and neatly, but that's not the point of a wireframe. I mean, you want it to look presentable, but you don't need to worry about making it look perfect. And I'm not going to worry about doing the icons for Google and GitHub and GitLab at this point, but I will quickly show you that I can switch between a different icon. So inside of this component, this button component, I have an icon component. And if I select that, in the design panel here, I have this arrow right icon. If I choose this icon here, it will give me the option for all the other icons that I can use that are inside the wireframing kit. And so maybe I wanted to change it to heart. No, that's inappropriate. I will use a bell. And so I can change the icons in there too. I'm just going to rename these for the sake of having different text in there and they're not just the same thing all over again. And next up, I want an input. And this will be a text input like this. Now that's just changed the size of the component. I need to go into the layer to change the text input size. Some of the components in here also have different options. So they're hidden by default, but I could add in, say, a search icon and I can show and hide it. This is quite a useful thing to do inside of components where you want to have optional elements inside of that component that you want to be bundled in with the component that people can easily turn on and off without having to detach the component instance. And this will be a label of work email. And I have a specific component I know somewhere for password. There we go. So it's got the nice little dots in there, so everyone knows what that means. So that's good communication if people know what you're talking about. And resize that so it's full width as well. And password. Then I got a little bit of text. Search for text. I don't want to type it out, so I'm just going to drag some little bit of body text in there. And a button. This is our main button on the page, so I'm going to make that a big button. Sometimes when you resize flex layouted objects, you end up with the text being fixed at the size it was previously. And the way that you can change that is here. It's saying size the text to the box size, fixed size. You can size it to the height of the text, but if you just hit auto width, it will automatically make the text the right size for the button. What about if I want to resize this button? If I can drag the component to make it bigger, like this. But what if I want to resize the whole thing so the text is bigger as well? I use the K keyboard shortcut. So I'm just hitting the K key. You can't see me doing it, but I promise you I am. And this changes the cursor. And my cursor is pretty small, so I hope you can see this, to a cursor that has double arrows on either side. And then I can drag and scale it up and down. It's jumping quite a lot to align with other elements. Here we go, calm down button. Okay, we'll make it really massive. I'm just going to hit K again so that I don't accidentally stay in scaling later on. Now, I think now would be a good point to see if anyone else has any questions. This is a reminder that we are live streaming, unless you're watching this back as a video later. And so if you have any questions, you can ask in the comments on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn. And do we have any questions? Not right now? Okay. Well, then why don't we move on to talking about using typographies? Oh, we've got one. Hang on, the text is very small on my little screen, so I have to read it quite carefully. The components in the imported library use some custom typographies. How would you change them to match your project? Edit the library typo or edit the components to link to your project typographies. it just so happens that question is so perfectly timed. It's like you're working for me and you're not. This is brilliant. So, next up, we're going to talk about using typographies in wireframes. First, I'm just have a little sip of water. Okay, so perfect timing. So as you point out, I do have typographies in this kit. And that's really useful if you want to use what is in the kit itself. And here you can see from the kit, if I've got typography selected in the palette at the bottom, there's a little options button here, and I can choose between my file libraries typographies, and I can choose between the typographies of the minimalist wireframing kit. And it depends what you want to do. Like, if you like the typographies that are provided, then you can just use those. So, for example, I might just add some text and say, already have an account, log in here. And I can select that and I can choose a typography that I want to use for it. So maybe it's just body text, and that makes it match the rest of it. What I can also do is I can set my own typographies that I want to use. An example of where I'm doing this is on the lo-fi wireframe. So this wireframe, now, subtle difference if you're not a typography nerd, this is a different typeface. And so this typeface here, this mega title, is Carla. And so for all of these lo-fi ones, I'm actually using these typographies that I've added in the file itself. But what if you want to do your own typography? What I would suggest is I'd create new linked typographies for each of the options if you want, or you can just change them in assets. So here I have all of the typographies available in my assets file library. This is just a mirror of what is down here, except that you've got options to change them here. So I'm just going to hide this for a minute. So for example, one of the most common things people want to do with wireframes is to prevent that confusion between, is this the real thing? Or like, is this what the website is actually going to look like? Is this what the app is going to look like? Or is this just a wireframe? They like to do hand-drawn style text. So it looks like handwriting. And that way, no one's going to confuse it. Unless you want to have a website that's all in handwriting, an option. So I can say for this mega title, I want to change the font to Comic Noia. I'm just winding you up. I'm not going to do it in Comic Sans. And I'll make that nice and fat as well. And so I can go through and just quickly change each of these. Now, what these typographies are doing is a typography is a linked text style. And so it means that I can use it across multiple different texts in my Penpot file. And when I update this typography, it will update it across all of those texts. So it's a really great way to make sure that you have header styles, body text styles, link styles, and you don't have to keep changing those settings over and over again. You can just apply this typography to them. So my body text is going to be Comic Noia, tick, and my button text. It's also, I'm going to make sure that that's a heavier weight as well, tick, and any random line of text, check, and mega titles, a bit bolder as well, check. The check is when I'm saving the style. And so my section title, that's me bolder too. So I've edited it, check it. Again, if I want to edit it, I press this options button. I can choose the new style. I can also rename it from here as well. If I want to say it's called big subtitle. By default, the typographies are named after the font that you've used and the font weight. but sometimes you want to be able to distinguish it more easily. It's much easier to read and easier to find, and can be more useful if you've got other people on your team working with you that you want to have a shared language with too. So big subtitle. Oh, that's also going to be that. It's just jumped to the top because it's in alphabetical order now. And finally, the title. Make that nice and bold too. And oh, I've made that really tiny somehow. Is that the Mega Megan one? Oh, I selected the wrong typography for that. There we go. Got it back. I had to change it to body text by accident. And so now my wireframe is entirely in handwritten style text. So we have that slightly more quirky style, and all I had to do was change it this many times rather than having to go through every single individual element and update them. So if you want to use a custom font, what I would recommend that you do is you duplicate the typographies that are in the wireframing kit, if you're using the wireframing kit or any other library. So just take these and copy them. One of the ways you can do that, I'll show you how to do that. So say I wanted to use this body text here. Is that a great example? Oh, I've got to select the text itself. Okay, so I've made that into this body text. If you then disconnect it and then plus it, that will then save it as a new typography to your local file. So I hope that answered the question in a very long-winded, roundabout way. Does anyone have any other questions? You can ask a question in the comments if you're watching us on live streaming, and that would be on YouTube or on LinkedIn. I can see scrolling through, seeing if there are any questions, and otherwise I will move on to showing you something that you might have heard about before, which is clickable wireframes and clickable prototyping. If you joined me at the last hands-on session, which was the first hands-on session, that's a confusing way of putting it, then you might already know about prototyping. Just in case you didn't already, I think that prototyping and wireframing really work well together, because when you're at the wireframing stage, this is a great point to be thinking about these kinds of behaviors. I'm going to jump back to my hi-fi wireframe version. And here I showed you before that because this is a high fidelity wireframe, you could do this in a low fidelity wireframe as well, but I've also mocked up my little mobile menu as a wireframe, and it was going to be triggered by this menu icon here. Now let's just hide these typographies. So I'm going to do a live prototype of how you might open the mobile menu and close it using this menu button. So to do that, I'm going to choose the menu button itself, and I'm going to go to the prototyping tab. Now here I have an interaction I've added earlier where on click, it opens the overlay of the mobile menu, and it's going to do it relative to, the relative to is irrelevant because I'm positioning it manually. If I want to position it automatically, say centered, I can choose where I want to center it to, but I'm doing manually here. And I am going to drag this manually to show where I want it to open up. Now, because I want this to behave like an overlay, I'm going to choose that it closes when clicking outside of it. And I'm going to add a background overlay, which kind of adds that background color behind it. I'm also going to add a cool slide animation, and it's going to slide in from the right. So that's what this arrow means. And yeah, I think 300 milliseconds is a fine duration. I don't want to do the maths for that right now. And with linear easing as well. Once you open the overlay, you want to have a means to close that overlay. That's very important. And that is what this close button here is for. And so I've created an interaction that to close the overlay, it's on click. When you've clicked this icon here, it's going to close the overlay. The destination, the overlay I want to close is self. and I'm going to slide it back in the other direction, and that is going to be with a duration of 300 milliseconds. Linear easing, you can do some other cool easing patterns too. I'm boring, stick with linear. So now that I have added those interactions in, I can either use this little play button in the top right corner, or this has automatically created me a flow, and I can give that a name. Actually, I'm going to call this mobile menu. And I can just hit that button and it's going to open me up in view mode. So this is the view mode for Penpot, which is a great way of presenting and sharing work. I'll go into that again in a second, a bit more detail. But for now, I can show you how my prototype works. So if I press this menu button, I hope it works. Yay! So there you go, my menu slides in. And if I press close, it slides out again. So you can see I've got the overlay color. I can click outside and it will close it. And it shows just like it would on the web page itself. So it's a really easy way to just add a little bit more behavior information into your wireframe. If you want to return to your wireframe, this is opened automatically in another tab. I can hop back to that original tab, or I can use this little edit button here to return back to edit mode. And now I'm back in edit mode. I can zoom in on my very long wireframe. So, have I gone through everything that I was going to go through in that section? Yes, I think I have. If you want to know any more about prototyping, if you want to prototype navigation, that's a really useful thing to do when you're doing wireframes, or a whole number of other prototype style interactions. I recommend you go and check the hands-on that I did before, and that's on prototyping. If you just search for Penpot Hands-on Prototyping, you'll be able to find it, and we go into a whole bunch of details there, and there's a file where you can look at how to do the prototyping from the example that I did in the hands-on demo. So are there any more questions that we have related to this section? Once your wireframe is done and accepted, do you use it directly to create the design? In which case, how do you keep and edit the original components you imported from your kit, buttons, etc.? Oh, that's a really interesting question. So yeah, I think usually I would probably be compelled to, especially if I've gone and typed out all of the text and it's as we're going to use it, I probably would end up reusing this for my next file. What I might do is I'd probably want to preserve the existing copy. So what I could do is I could copy the boards and I could add a new page in my file, and I could add a, so maybe I go mock-up. And, oh, I don't want to copy the text, I want to copy the board. So to copy, paste. And so then I might start working directly from here. If I was going to do that, and how I'd want to keep the buttons and things like that, what I would probably do, I think for me the most logical thing would probably be to, now hang on, I've copied this across, so, this is not, if I do it from the live demo version actually, because I already detached the components, not a great example there. Okay, so this is my wireframe that I just made using the wireframing kit. And so if I copy the board to another page in my file, it's going to have all of these components. You can tell they're components because they're purple and they have this little diamond icon. It's keeping all of those components intact. But what if I want to change it? What if I want to start thinking about what color I'm going to make this create an account button? What I would personally do, so this is, I don't know whether I would say as a best practice, it's a me practice. Is that the same thing? Probably not. I would detach the component. I would make the changes to it. So I want to change my fill color. I'm going to make it green. Why not? Color of the summer. And I would probably be inclined to then create a new component from it. So I'm going to create a component. So this is now its own main component. It has all of the features that the button component previously had, except I've added a new color to it and it can't get overridden. And so I'd say that that was probably my ideal way of doing it in this situation. If you didn't want to preserve any of these components at all, and you probably wanted to work in a different file, maybe you don't want to have massive files getting unruly, it's hard to organize them, it's hard to work out what's up to date, then I'd probably be inclined to go into the dashboard and create a copy, duplicate the file. I've done this before quite a lot. And then go in, make all my changes that I want to do, like I wouldn't need that anymore, delete that page, delete that page, delete that page, delete all these pages, and then just continue working from this, and I would detach the components. If I wanted to do it completely detaching all the components really quickly, the trick I would do there would be to download my Penpot file and treat the shared library assets as basic objects. And then when I downloaded it, all the items would be completely detached from their original components and would be easy to edit without worrying about any shared library updating, any shared library updates overriding my components. Do we have any more questions on this area before I move on? Is there a way to mock up a design for light mode and dark mode at the same time? Or do you need to make two separate mock-ups? Not super relevant for wireframing, but for the hi-fi version. Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is not right now to do them simultaneously, no. I mean, arguably you couldn't really do that simultaneously anyway, I don't think. You maybe could do something clever with components. But what I would say is there are some pretty cool plugins you should be looking out for perhaps in the future that do have support for that. And that would be built around is colors. And so imagine here in your colors section in your library, you had a whole different bunch of colors, and then you specified a group of them were for dark and a group of them were for light, but you had the same values otherwise. So for example, I had dark accent, light accent. And so maybe for light mode, I'd have this dark purple, and for dark mode, I'd have a really light purple. And then it's very easy to switch between the two. Right now, there's not a quicker way to do that, but I have seen a really cool plugin that someone made for Penpot that does a really great integration for that. So I'd say look out for that in the future for sure. Right. Any more questions on this section before I move on to telling you about something else? Looking at my side screen. No? Okay, fabulous. Then I'm going to go on to a really important section, which is presenting and sharing your wireframes. I'm going to jump back to the file I was in previously, one that I didn't delete everything from. And so I've got to the point where I've created my demo, my little sign up screen here. And I want to be able to share it with either the people that I'm working with or with a client or with somebody else. So how do you want to do that? Now, for one, if you're working in Penpot, you can invite them to your team and they can just jump in and see the file. You can even work on the file together with multiplayer. So that's probably the ideal way, working with your team if you've got anyone else who might want to work alongside you. If you want to share it with someone who is not necessarily on your team, now, first I want to show you a trick that I learned after the last hands-on session, where if you were with me, you might remember that when I went into view mode, there were too many boards. I have learned why and how to fix that now. So I want to share this with you. And that is this little icon here. So inside of the design panel, when I have a board selected, there's a play button here. If I deselect it, it won't show in view mode. If I select it, it will show in view mode. So you no longer have to have all of the boards on your page in view mode. You can choose the ones that you want to show. So for example, if I was working with this image and it was on a board itself, and I'm going to call this board image. Do I want my client to see my reference image when I'm presenting to them? Not really. So I'm going to choose this board and I'm going to deselect that. Now, when I go into view mode, which remember is the play icon in the top right corner, I can access this board, but there aren't any other boards listed. So distraction-free mode for clients, co-workers, anyone on your team. So this is view mode, which I would say is one of the best places to share your work, whether you are presenting in person, whether you're doing it over a video call or something like that. This is a really great way to share. And you can also send a link to anyone else, whether they're an existing Penpot user or not. They can sign up for free and view your board too. If you create this share link here, you can choose what you want to share with the person you're sharing the share link. So for example, maybe you do want to share the initial versions with them. You want to show you did a sketch and you should be proud. So I'm going to share that, but I'm not going to show the lo-fi version. I'll share a hi-fi version. I'll share this demo. I'll share my mock-up. And then I can choose, do I want all Penpot users to be able to comment? So anyone receiving the file or only the people that are on my team? And also for inspecting the code. I mean, you can get code for a wireframe. That is totally doable. Maybe you want to create a clickable prototype for user testing, like a actual code clickable prototype. So you could use the code for that. So you can choose these options and you can generate a link to share with them. When you want that link to be done with, you can also destroy it. So I'm going to destroy that link and then no one can use it. And when they're in view mode, people can also leave comments. So they can do the classic, make the logo bigger, and leave comments that will show up when you're in comment mode. And you can reply to your comments too. If you go back to the workspace, you can also toggle comments from here. So if you want to see the comments in place relevant to what the client or the person you're working with left you can see them in this sidebar here, and they'll appear in the place that they were left too. And you can, of course, also go and preview your little animations and things. See, this is an example of where I have not hidden the boards from view mode. But if I go to the home page here, you can also preview those interactions. You can also check out the code too, if you wanted to. So I think that was everything that I wanted to share with you all today. So now is the time for the ultimate Q&A. Please have some questions left over for me. Are there any questions that you want to ask about wireframing with Penpot? Or you can ask other Penpot related questions if you want. I will do my best to answer them. If you are on LinkedIn or if you're on YouTube, just ask the questions in the comments. If you're not watching this live, I'm sorry, but you can always leave a question in the comments and we'll try to get back to you, or you can join us on the Penpot community. So do we have any questions? She looks over to the side. Yes. What's the next hands-on session about? It is almost like you're working for me. This is brilliant. I really appreciate your great questions. Right now we are working on it. Do you have any suggestions of things that you want to talk about? We're considering looking at layouts. I think that's a really exciting feature of Penpot that I love working with. It's something that I think is really unique to Penpot and is really cool for both designers and developers. And so I think that would be a fun thing to talk about, maybe flex layouts, grid layouts, things like that. But if there are any other topics that you care about, are interested in, having problems or difficulties with, and you want some help, please let me know. Please let us know in the community. Please let us know in the comments here. I'd really love to hear your feedback on these sessions and what you get out of them. If there's anything else that you want us to cover, I'm doing my best. I think there's so many cool features to look through and work with, and different examples and use cases that we could try out. So I'm up for it. If you are. Any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to go back to one of these others. Oh, I'm still in comments mode. Can I create hand-drawn style wireframes with Penpot? Not easily is my answer to this. I've been looking at a way of creating a library or template for this, and there currently isn't one. I think that it is doable using different vector shapes, but I would say it is not the most practical thing to do right now. And quite honestly, I think that having a wireframe that uses a handwritten style is usually sufficient if your fonts are in a handwritten style. When people say hand-drawn style wireframe, they're talking about having sort of sketchy lines and things like that. I think that can look really cool and be very useful in like saying to someone, this isn't the finished, polished version of my wireframe. This isn't the final site. This is just rough. But I would say that this is the best way to go about it right now. And look out, because I'm going to keep trying to create a library for this. So if I manage it, it will go into the libraries and templates page if it gets reviewed and people like it. I have to pass the approval process too. Does anyone else have any questions? How do you version control wireframes in Penpot? There's a few different ways you could do this. So, and this applies to really any kind of file in Penpot. If you are already using a Git-based setup with your team, because of the nature of Penpot files and because you can open them so easily, I would suggest that maybe you could actually use Git to check in your files. They're often not massive, so that can be quite useful. If you're not a nerd developer like me, you might just want to think about how you name your files and how you work on them. So as we were looking at earlier, the idea of working from your wireframe to create a more high fidelity mockup, you probably want to preserve the original copy of that wireframe and maybe duplicate your file and give it another name. You could create a new project for each version. So you could have a version 1 project and a version 2 project. And every time you create a new version, you do that. You could name your files version 1, version 2. What I would advise against is using final in your file names. That never seems to work. If you put final, it will never be the final version. And so I think that that's probably the best way to work on versioning your files. Any more questions? So think about wrapping up soon. We've almost hit an hour. Can't believe it. Maybe we'll just go for one more question, if we've got one. Is it better to use a library or to draw wireframes using shapes? Well, that's something I didn't get into very much today. And so if I jump back into this file here, now you can use a minimalist wireframing kit or another wireframing kit to use components. But as you can see, a lot of the time, the components are pretty simple. Your wireframes are pretty simple. And you could just draw shapes yourself. And it really depends on what you're most comfortable with. If you want to really quickly be able to throw text and particularly form inputs and things that are a bit more complicated onto a board, then I would say that using component library is really helpful for that. However, if you wanted to create something a lot simpler, you could just create a little board and start drawing shapes in. Like, oh, this is my banner. No fill because it's a wireframe, but it's got a stroke. So it's a wireframe. And maybe I have an image with a stroke because it's a wireframe. And I'm going to create some lines. The classic wireframe image, like visual language, is to have a cross in a box. That's what an image is. And so you could very easily and quickly create wireframes that way as well. But I'd say a library is a great way to get started. When I'm compelled to create a wireframe in this way, it's often because I'm still going through the thinking process. And sometimes I find that if you get down to the simplest details, if you're no distractions, you're just trying to think about, what do I need to do for this design? I'm thinking for me, I'm going through the design process for me. I'm trying to get all of these ideas out. Sometimes I find working from a simpler version like that is very helpful. So I think we will wrap it up then for today. It's been so great having everyone here. I really appreciate your fantastic questions. That's the whole point of these live sessions, is to have all of you here to be able to ask any questions that you want. I hope that I have shared everything that you wanted to know about wireframing with Penpot. And if not, no worries. You can always jump into the community, or you can leave a comment on this video, ask any questions that you might have. Tell me about your project that you're working on and what you need to do with it, and if you have any questions that what Penpot can do for you on your project, and I will do my best to get back to you or even answer your question in a future hands-on session. We will be having another hands-on session in a little while. I say a little while because I haven't got it written down right now exactly what that date is, but stay tuned to the Penpot mailing list, to the Penpot social accounts, and you will be the first to find out when the next hands-on session is. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I've had a great time. I hope you have too, and I will see you soon.